Just moments ago, the palace trembled beneath the weight of a revelation that had been long hidden. In a moment of rare unity, Prince William and Princess Anne stepped forward, not with pomp or ceremony, but with somber expressions and a shared burden. The world was left gasping as they confirmed that truth about King Charles, his condition. But this wasn't sudden. The signs had been there all along, carefully masked, deliberately buried. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The announcement landed like a thunderclap, not because it was loud, but because of who delivered it. William and the future of the crown, and the keeper of its memory, to figures rarely aligned so publicly, now standing shoulder to shoulder, bound by urgency rather than tradition. Their voices were controlled, but the weight behind their words was unmistakable. This was not a routine update. This was an admission the palace had resisted for far too long. Almost instantly, the global media machine shifted into overdrive. Headlines rewrote themselves in real time. Commentators replayed the statement again and again. I'm searching for hidden meaning between pauses and phrasing. What stunned many wasn't just the content of the message, but the timing. 1 minute ago, the monarchy stood unchanged. The next, everything felt fragile, exposed, human. Suddenly, past appearances of King Charles took on an unsettling clarity. The prolonged silences, the rigid smiles that faded too quickly. The way official engagements grew shorter, more controlled, more scripted. What once seemed like exhaustion now felt like warning signs. Everyone had been trained to ignore, trained to explain away, trained to forget. Behind the scenes, insiders began to whisper what they had long feared, saying out loud that royal duties had been quietly staged, that schedules were altered not for convenience but necessity, that aides were asked no order to sign silence into their loyalty. The palace, once a fortress of tradition, had become a chamber of containment designed to protect the crown at all costs. Catherine's absence, once brushed off as personal timing or strategic discretion, now settled into a far darker context. She wasn't missing, she was repositioned, preparing, planning, standing just outside the spotlight while the foundation beneath it weakened. Nothing about this moment was accidental. And then came the most chilling realization of all. This announcement was not part of a long-planned disclosure. It was rushed, forced by something the palace could no longer control, a turn, a decline, a moment when silence became more dangerous than truth. William and Anne did not step forward because they wanted to. They stepped forward because time ran out. But what led to this dramatic moment wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a storm quietly brewing behind gilded palace walls. While the world watched King Charles fulfill his duties with a regal smile behind palace gates, whispers of fatigue, confusion, and urgent medical visits grew louder. The monarchy became a stage of illusion as aides fought to suppress the truth until even they couldn't hold it back. It started quietly, almost invisibly. MR briefings here and there, moments of hesitation during otherwise rehearsed appearances. A repeated sentence caught on camera, a lapse in memory shrugged off as stress. But those closest to the king knew it was more than just exhaustion. It wasn't a single event that triggered concern, it was a pattern. And it was accelerating behind the throne. The tension was growing. Positions tasked with both healing and discretion began urging for a temporary withdrawal from public life. Their reports were clinical, cautious, but the implications are dire. They warned of cognitive strain, unpredictable lapses, and the risk of public exposure, but their counsel was not followed. It was dismissed, or worse, overruled, because the show had to go on. The crown could not appear frail, even if the man wearing it was beginning to unravel. Camilla, fiercely protective of Charles, his image allegedly became the strongest voice in the room for maintaining appearances. She argued that retreating now would spark rumors far more damaging than quiet denial. She pushed for shorter engagements, carefully crafted statements, and a team of handlers trained to intervene discreetly. For a time it worked. The mask held, but only just. Unwilling to be complicit in silence, Princess Anne began keeping her own private record. Close aides noted she would leave dinners early or skip public receptions, often returning to her residence alone with nothing but handwritten notes in her grasp. Anne was just worried. She was documenting, observing every irregularity, every flash of confusion, every moment that confirmed what she feared. Her brother was fading, and the palace was pretending otherwise. William began voicing concern, first in whispers, then in increasingly frustrated pleas to advisors he can fight. In those closest to him, the Charles's health was deteriorating faster than anyone was willing to admit. But every time he brought it up, he was met with the same cold deferral. It's not time yet. They urged patience. They reminded him of legacy, of duty, of optics. But none of it comforted him. He was not only watching his father change, he was watching a machine choose silence over truth. A grim timeline had been building. Internal memos marked missed royal briefings, incomplete schedules, and impromptu medical reviews. All hidden, all stamped with confidentiality, but those records, now slowly surfacing among trusted royal staff, painted a picture far starker than any official statement ever would. They showed the decline wasn't new, it was simply no longer containable, and yet amid this carefully orchestrated silence, one meeting would break the dam wide open when Prince William and Princess stormed the Queen's drawing room late one evening. No press or cameras were present, but what happened within those walls would shatter royal protocol. The heir and the loyal sister were no longer silent witnesses. They demanded answers, and they wouldn't leave without them. It had been building for weeks, the frustration, the helplessness, the constant rerouting of questions. William, once known for his composed demeanor, was now visibly strained, haunted by the weight of knowing the truth, yet being bound by centuries of duty and hardened by decades of loyal service. Had reached her limit. Between them, they had gathered enough private observations, fragmented medical updates, and the sharp decline that everyone else pretended not to see. They walked into the room, not as passive members of a centuries-old institution, but as children have a man slipping away in plain sight. The atmosphere inside was icy. Camilla, already informed of their intent, stood from behind her. A few senior aides and palace doctors, summoned at her request, tried to maintain control, but there was no stopping what came next. William confronted the room with the force of his title, but more than that, with the urging, "See, have a son." His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from months of silence weaponized against his father's reality. He demanded transparency, and didn't speak at first. She simply placed a worn leather-bound notebook on the table. It was filled with months of her handwritten entries, dates, moments, observations, meticulously recorded like a soldier tracking a war. No one else acknowledged the pages didn't lie. Charles was deteriorating, and they had all been watching it happen in real time. Camilla pushed back, accusing them of overreacting, of misunderstanding the burden of kinship. She insisted that public panic would only worsen the situation, that the monarchy needed to appear strong no matter the cost, and had no time for diplomatic games. She snapped, her voice sharp with restrained fury. "This isn't about the crown, this is about the man wearing it." The tension exploded. Rumors later swirled that his voices rose and hands slammed onto the table. A framed portrait of the late Queen fell to the floor. Some believed it was an omen, others called it a coincidence. But to those in the room, it felt like the room itself was trying to speak. William, his patience finally shattered, broke down. His words, as reported by a sheikh and staffer, echoed through the palace halls. "Even after he left, we can't lie to the world anymore. Not about this." The royal communications team paled with dread, urged delay. They pleaded for time to craft the narrative carefully, to minimize backlash, to keep the legacy intact. But William didn't blink. He gave them an ultimatum: either the truth would be shared, or he would share it himself with or without permission. And as tempers calmed and decisions were made, one question remains: how do you tell the world a king is fading? Camilla, queen consort, was not prepared to lose control as William, and unprepared though public statement, she launched a silent counterattack, one that would divide the family even further. But was her motive preservation, or something more sinister? The announcement, now inevitable, was a threat to everything Camilla had worked to build since stepping into the inner sanctum of royal power. To her, the crown was more than a symbol, it was a fortress, and King Charles, though visibly slipping, remained its figurehead in the world. To see him unravel would, in her eyes, unravel the monarchy itself. So as and William pushed forward with a plan for transparency, Camilla began constructing her own counter-narrative, one carefully designed to silence the storm inside her. Speak of a flurry of activity within Clarence House in the days that followed the confrontation. Camilla, surrounded by her closest confidants, reportedly demanded all scheduled outings proceed, even if modified behind the scenes. Leaked internal emails revealed an unsettling strategy: staged Charles' appearances to seem spontaneous, light-hearted, and above all lucid staff were instructed to escort him subtly, adjust his speaking points and tightly controlled camera angles. Every movement was rehearsed, every word so brutalized. What stunned many within the palace, however, was the revelation that Camilla had bypassed traditional communication channels entirely. Without William's consent or knowledge, she allegedly enlisted outside public relations specialists to advise on royal optics, not long-time palace professionals, but private firms. I used to managing corporate scandal and celebrity crisis, not royal duty. It was a bold and controversial move, one that sent a wave of unease through the monarchy senior advisors. In response to growing media speculation, Camilla, his inner circle, ordered a temporary media blackout. Public updates on the king's schedule were suspended, press releases grew vague, access was denied. At first it seemed a tactical pause, but as silence deepened, suspicion swelled. Journalists began asking pointed questions. Why was Charles no longer speaking? Engagements. Why were live events suddenly being pre-recorded? The blackout had the opposite effect. It didn't suppress curiosity, it ignited it. Behind the scenes, tensions erupted again, this time between Anne and Camilla, according to palace sources, and confronted her sister-in-law in a private corridor, her voice low, as sharp. "This isn't your crown to protect," she said, cold and resolute. "It's his, and he deserves dignity, not illusion." The confrontation was brief, but the message was clear, and would not let a false image be painted over her brother's truth. Then came the most telling moment of all, the resignation of Charles' longtime valet, a man who had served the monarch with quiet loyalty for over 2 decades. His departure wasn't framed with royal pleasantries. He left with a single pointed statement to a close confidant: "I won't be part of a lie." Those words and tremors through the corridors of the palace and confirmed what many had feared: truth was being buried beneath protocol. But as palace doors closed on their internal war, the world was already noticing cracks in the royal facade. They thought they could keep it buried, but the public noticed sharp eyes, relentless social media. The sleuths and former insiders began connecting the dots. The palace's perfect illusion was collapsing under the weight of its own lives. It began online, as it often does in an age where nothing truly stays hidden. A series of brief disjointed clips of King Charles at recent engagements were stitched together by anonymous users. What emerged was deeply unsettling, halting speech, last train of thought, and a now unmistakable blink of confusion that appeared with increasing regularity. These weren't isolated anomalies, they were patterns, and the public was beginning to see what the palace had tried so hard to control. Viral TikToks dissecting these moments racked up millions of views overnight. Frame by frame, they revealed the king's struggles, subtle stumbles, prolonged pauses, and expressions that betrayed inner disorientation. Comments exploded with concern. "Is no one talking about this?" became a rallying cry, echoing through threads and timelines. The once reverent silence surrounding royal health had cracked, and through that crack poured a tidal wave of scrutiny. Then came the post that changed everything. An anonymous email appeared on Reddit claiming to be from a former palace staffer, verified only by timing, tone, and painfully specific detail. The thread caught fire. The author didn't give everything away, but what they shared was enough to spark a storm. Irregular schedules, security being instructed to memorize medical emergency roads, and Charles being rushed to private consultations under assumed names. Screenshots were deleted, but the truth once released couldn't be contained. At the same time, an op-ed from a respected former royal physician added fuel to the fire. Without naming names, he hinted at a high-profile figure battling a neurodegenerative illness whose symptoms had been apparent for months. The subtext was clear to anyone paying attention, and just like that, the medical silence that once protected the monarch was now complicit in undermining public trust. Royal correspondents, long cautious in how far they dared to pry, suddenly found themselves emboldened. They began questioning the palace's official statements in live broadcasts. They cross-referenced timelines. They confronted PR staff who had no answers and fewer explanations. The spin was no longer working. Every denial was met with louder questions, every silence interpreted as confirmation. And the public wasn't just watching anymore. They were acting. Protesters began gathering at Windsor, outside Buckingham, and even near Balmoral, holding signs that read, "We have the right to know," and "Truth before tradition." They demanded transparency. These weren't anti-monarchists, these were loyal citizens pleading for honesty, for the dignity of a man. The I admired, and the integrity of the institution they supported, cornered by truth and fueled by guilt. William, and then knew it was time to end the charade. December 26. The world held its breath. William and side by side, faces pale but resolute, stepped before the cameras. No fanfare, no royal pageantry, just two voices, trembling but strong, delivering a truth that would change the monarchy forever. Hours before the statement, the palace was quiet but not still. Behind closed doors, William and then rehearsed the words they never wanted to speak. Aide said they broke down more than once, stepping away in silence to collect themselves. This wasn't just protocol, it was personal. They were not announcing a royal update. They were opening the world to a grief they had long tried to contain. Every sentence was a blow, every pause a cry they had swallowed too long, and yet when the cameras turned on, they stood with the weight of centuries behind them. Catherine was noticeably absent, a detail that didn't go unnoticed by observers. Some speculated it was due to the emotional toll. Others believed her absence was deliberate, protecting the children from the chaos sure to follow. But her absence only heightened the tension. Something was different, something had changed forever. Then came the words that shattered the illusion. The king is facing a complex and deeply personal health challenge. A simple phrase, yet it rang with devastating finality. There was no name for the illness, no specific diagnosis, but the message was unmistakable. The king was no longer the figure the world had known, and the monarchy was no longer a mirror of stability. It was now a story of survival. Minutes after the announcement, a short clip was released. King Charles seated behind a window at Sandringham, raising a frail hand, an acknowledgement. The wave was slow, his eyes searching. It was meant to calm the storm, but instead it broke hearts. That one wave confirmed everything. The statement didn't say the man who he tbgb the lifetime to where the crown was now drifting beyond its reach. The reaction was immediate across social media, television networks, and city streets. The collective gasp turned into a unified murmur of support, sorrow, and disbelief. Crowds began forming outside Buckingham Palace without being summoned. Floral tributes appeared within the hour, messages scrawled in ink and grief read, "We stand with you." The public didn't just mourn the condition of a king, they mourned the silence they had unknowingly been complicit in. And then, in a move that broke with every rule of tradition, the flag at Buckingham Palace was lowered to half-mast, not for death, but for truth. A symbolic act meant to honor not the end, but the courage to finally speak. For many it marked a new chapter. For others it was a silent confession that the old world was fading. But the story didn't end with the announcement. What came next would shake the very foundation of succession. With the monarch weekend and the truth exposed, the ancient question returned with urgency. Who now holds the reins of power? The answer was far from clear, and for the first time in decades the royal family faced the specter of transition and division behind palace doors. The air was heavy. The announcement had done what centuries of tradition had sought to avoid. It revealed the vulnerability of the crown. And now, as Charles receded from the public eye, the machinery of monarchy scrambled to answer a question that had no precedent in modern memory. Who governs when the king is still alive, but no longer present? The first whispers were of a regency. Formalized, not spoken out loud in public, but the term began circulating among senior aides and constitutional advisors like a code too dangerous to utter fully, a temporary transfer of authority carried out in silence, but loaded with consequence. It was a move you wanted, but one many believed was already underway in practice, if not in name. William, for all his sense of duty, hesitated, not from fear, but from reverence. According to one senior advisor, he said, "Not while he's breathing. He's still the king. I'm not replacing him." Those words, though noble, left the palace in limbo. Without a clear heir stepping forward, uncertainty filled the vacuum, and uncertainty breeds conflict. Camilla, already at the center of so much controversy, was rumored to have floated the idea of assuming a temporary regency herself. It was a move that sparked immediate fury, most notably from Princess Anne, who reportedly stormed out of a private meeting declaring, "This is not a game of musical chairs." Her words sharpened wrong signal to growing fracture, not just in the public narrative, but within the royal bloodline itself. Amid the tension, a quieter figure began to surface. Prince Edward, long respected but rarely thrust into political spotlight, stepped forward as an unofficial mediator. His calm presence offered a temporary balm to the escalating internal conflict. But even his efforts couldn't suppress the rising tide of legal and political debate behind the scenes. Constitutional scholars began unearthing a little-known clause embedded within decades-old parliamentary reform, a provision some refer to as the royal devolution.